is that
done?
the, yeah, streaming is just now starting up. So go ahead.
Oh, okay. And so this is, again, the Committee on Administration meeting, Dunn County. We have a quorum today. We have Mr. Jim Tripp. We have Supervisor John Calabrese. We have Supervisor Tim Leno. We have Supervisor myself, Juan Hedlund. We have Sheila Story and Dave Bartlett. Along with that, we have a number of the members of the administration team here at the county. Our first order of business then was a call to order. And as I said, all the committee members are here. Approval of the minutes from September 24th, 2020 meeting. Would anyone so move?
I'll move. Tim Leno.
Okay, Tim moves. There's second to that.
Sheila Story, second.
Sheila Story seconds. Any questions or corrections that anyone has noted? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. We'll move on to 4A on our agenda, and that is reports from the various departments. Those all should have came to you via emails, and I'd like to thank our staff for getting those out in time, and I really enjoy actually a written report. Any questions on any of those reports by any of the supervisors?
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Story, Sheila Story, please go ahead.
Just a question on the human resources one. It talked about hiring 2 people to help with the contact tracing, and it was the same 2 names with 2 different dates. And I wondered if there was a particular reason for that.
Yeah, Heather, it was about a week apart when I listed the same 2 names. I don't know if they were hired for a week and then hired for a longer period after that.
No, I probably provided an incorrect name. So it would have been 2 different people, 2 different dates. I can email out the correct information. I apologize.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
I also have a question.
Okay, go ahead, Tim.
Basically, at the bottom of the report for human resources, Kelsey Worth was hired. Just out of curiosity, where did she come from and prior experience?
Sorry, it takes me a minute to find the mute button. She is our intern. So she's actually a student. Her experience is she's gaining experience with us. She actually previously was in the dental field and went back to go into human resources. So she's with us 20 hours a week, interning, attending UW Stout.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anything else in terms of departmental reports?
I have one other question regarding financial officer. Is Keith available or not?
He's not on the meeting. He's on vacation this week.
Oh, okay.
We can try to field it for you, though. Go ahead.
But not a problem. It's just a couple of points down on his. It just says, continuing to monitor county cash flows and revenue projections due to economic downturn related to COVID-19. Just out of curiosity, what is the percentage of downturn that we're having regarding cash flow?
And that is something, in fact, a detail that I will have to track down for you, Supervisor Lee now.
Okay.
So I will try to get that information out to you and we'll distribute it to the committee.
All right. And I had one other question also, a little farther down on the page. Announcing basically saying that we have administrative staff turnover. I was just kind of wondering, as Morgan is the leader there, how long after the first of the year is he going to be retained in this position?
Are you okay? That sounded like 2 different things. Administrative staff turnover would be here in the Department of Administration. Solid Waste and Recycling, however, Morgan Girk is the director. We have budgeted for him to be on for next year because there is the entire process for locking down and mothballing, if you will, the transfer station. There is the sale of assets to municipal RUs. There is the disposition that may be necessary with respect to the sites, the remote sites. There may be cleanup or other things that have to be handled. There's reporting and filing that has to be accommodated. And there's the potential future use of the transfer station to be discussed and administered as well. So we have budgeted for Morgan to stay on for the year. Of course, if the work runs out and there's nothing to do, the possibility that he would depart sooner is out there, but it's very hard to predict.
Nothing at this moment then. Okay.
No.
And then I have also one other question here would be for Sarah, if she's available. Sarah, you out there? Basically, a ways down on one of the bullet points here, stepping up work group in exploring medication-assisted treatment. And I was just wondering, medication-assisted treatment for what?
So that's a complementary service that should be going on with substance abuse treatment. And it's most readily known and available for opioid addiction. So methadone, Suboxone, Vivitrol, especially that population when they're in jail and there was use prior to jail. It can be deadly for them to get out of jail if they go back to their using ways. So MAT in jail, it's a best practice. It's something that the Stepping Up work group is really exploring to offer in our jail. Thankfully, we don't have the level of method or opioid addiction that we see across the country. It's a smaller percentage of our population, but the overdose potential is significant with that group. So MAT is a way that where they could get a shot that would essentially block the opioid receptors in their brain. They get that prior to getting released from jail. So then if they did try to use, their brain would already be blocking the opioid from engaging and they wouldn't get high from it. The idea is that coupled with traditional counseling to work on the behavior change is the most effective. So it's something that it's a best practice, something that we should be looking to do if we can with our folks as well. I wish there was an approved medically assisted treatment for methamphetamines. That's what we see in our community most, but there's not. But there is for the opioid addicted population.
Okay, thank you. I just didn't know if it was a mental health situation or if it was a chemically dependent situation. I appreciate the clarification. Thank you very much, Sarah. I have one other question here for corporate counsel, if that's all right.
Go ahead, Nick is here.
Okay. Also, in his report, there was something referred to as comprehensive redraft on the private septic systems. I was wondering if he could kind of expand on that if we're in a position to at this time.
Yeah, we have an ordinance that's not codified that regulates private on-site waste treatment or, your septic tank. It's outdated. And once Michelle Erliska, I think is how you pronounce her name, works in the zoning division. Once her activities with respect to checking for new septic permits winds down, she and I are going to get together and start working on revising that and bringing it up to date and then including it in the code of ordinances.
When was the last time that was changed, Nick?
I'm going to say 1982, maybe.
It's so time. Definitely time.
Yes, it is. I'm pretty sure it was typed on an IBM Selectric computer or typewriter. I'm sorry.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it. Kind of interested being a rural resident, would always kind of like to keep my ear towards that a little bit, if I may.
Sure.
All right. And I have one other question here regarding Julie. Is she
Julie is
available?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay. Hi, Julie. Just kind of wondering, I see in the second paragraph, first couple lines, they're talking about election security training and discussing several security issues with the advent of the election coming up here. I was just wondering if there was any talk regarding voter intimidation, and also finding out whether or not are people bringing guns to the election or what, you know, that kind of stuff. Just wondering if some of that stuff had been discussed.
There has been discussions with that with the Wisconsin Elections Committee. However, each polling place is run by each municipality. So in relation to the guns or weapons, weapons are not automatically banned at a polling place. That would be a decision made by each municipality. I have been in talks with the sheriff, and he plans to have additional staff on election day. There are some municipalities that inquired about having officers at the polling place. That is not a recommended practice, as it is part of a voter intimidation then. They do have a section, and the chief inspectors have a small section of election security in their training. And I know the Elections Commission is working on a video with the Capitol Police in Madison on how to handle some situations that they're hopefully going to get out yet in the coming week, next week. So generally the polling place is ran by the municipality, and I wouldn't have any jurisdiction over that. I do assist if they need help. I will, if it's a rural, assist in getting the sheriff or what need be involved. So I'm not sure if that answers your question or if you want something further.
Well, no, I just to, in light of news reports and all sorts of things that you've been hearing and seeing in the news these days, it was a question that I had, and thank you so much for being able to answer my question.
I don't anticipate a lot of the things that were put out, Madison, Milwaukee, that demographic. We may get observers and may have to have some issues there, but that would be about all I anticipate at this time.
Okay.
And the sheriff
Well,
says.
thank you very much, Julie. And
Yep.
And Mr. Chairman, I am done asking questions.
Well, thank you, Tim. Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to 4B on our agenda today. What? Would you have another question?
Yeah, this is Supervisor Tripp. I
Yeah, Jim.
apologize. I have trouble finding my unmute button. It stays in the same place, but my head moves around. I have a question for Eric in IT. The very first paragraph of his report talks about the routes to recovery. And I'm wondering how IT, route to recovery money, and the sheriff and the townships all get together. This first paragraph is a mystery to me, and I wonder if he could expand on it a little bit.
Well, in the previous reports, I had kind of been laying the foundation for that. We as a county, we received $720 some thousand for routes to recovery that we could expend on defined categories, which we have spent all of that money. It became apparent one of the municipalities had reached out to the sheriff that they weren't going to utilize their money. We looked into it and found that the municipalities could transfer all or a portion of unused funds to the county to be utilized. The sheriff took the lead on that and contacted, I think, a majority of the municipalities and the townships. And we did end up receiving a significant amount of money. We just received the last chunk from Tiffany now of another $10,100. So our total take then was around, I think it was 850 or 860,000. So that money was then moved into, on the state grant site, moved into the county's allocations to spend. And we've allocated and spent all of it, but about, I think about $18,000 to $20,000.
And where does the sheriff fit into all this?
He took the lead on reaching out to the municipalities to inquire if they would be willing to transfer their funds to the county.
Just because he's a nice guy, or was this,
He offered to do it. We have a steering meeting for COVID-19 on Mondays. We have it 3 times a week. I think the discussion started there. But anyway, he had one of the townships had, I think it was Red Cedar, one of them had reached out to him just by coincidence. I don't know why they picked him and said that they were not going to use the funds that were the county interested in taking them. And so I basically had talked to Paul about it, and we discussed it. I reached out to Marshall and the sheriff and asked if they would be interested in contacting all the municipalities and the townships, which they did. And then Luann Domes in our office has been keeping track of all of it and working with the municipalities and the townships to actually get the money transferred. And we've actually, like I said, that gave us an additional almost $100,000 in funds through those transfers.
Actually, the sheriff was a good idea, Supervisor Tripp, because he does have a relationship with the municipal officials. And so he proved to be a good ambassador for making the inquiry. We weren't trying to talk townships out of using their monies, but as it turned out, many of them did not have COVID qualified expenses and did have monies available. So the sheriff was an ideal ambassador to make that inquiry.
well, I appreciate all those efforts. And what I wondered at first is if the money was somehow earmarked for law enforcement activities or something like that. In this case, it's just the sheriff was in the right place, the right guy, right time, right
Yes.
attitude. Well, good. Thanks to all of the folks who were involved in that. I appreciate those efforts.
Well, thank you. And I think the point, the sheriff did spend several $100,000 of those funds. I think there was a big part of it that was for jails and so forth. So I imagine that's probably why the original township reached out to him. I'm not sure, but Paul's right. He did a very good job and did act as an ambassador. It wasn't a strong arm thing. It was just, he was the right person at the right time to get the job done.
I try to emphasize the value of having a sidearm when you're inquiring about money.
Okay, thank you, Jim. And Eric, thank you for filling us in that information. Anything else, supervisors? Anybody else have a question on any of the reports? Okay, seeing none. Let's move on to 4B on our agenda. Investment report from PFM Investment Advisors. And today we have Dan Nelson and Brian Johnson with us. And I'm going to turn it over to them.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Doris, it looks like Doris is on. I don't know if she wanted to provide an introduction at all here or not, but I could certainly just go ahead and get started. My name is Brian Johnson, and I think I've met a few of you in the past in person. Glad to be joining you virtually today. A little bit about me is I'm actually a Dunn County former resident. I was born and raised in the county, so it's a pleasure for me to get to work with the county in this capacity, and I enjoy doing so. I currently live in Minnesota now, but don't hold that against me. Like I said, I enjoy getting to continue to work with the county, and like I said, when in-person meetings are happening, we enjoy coming back to do those. I'm also joined today by a colleague of mine, Danny Nelson, who's on this call as well. Danny, I don't know if anybody has met before, but Danny joined our group from our Chicago office not too long ago. I was going to joke that he made the worst time to move to Minnesota because he moved from Chicago to Minnesota at the beginning of March, and immediately he was going into quarantine and had to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. So, but fortunate to have Danny. He's been a key contributor and colleague at PFM for a long time, and will be working with me alongside the county and the investment of the portfolio. So I do have the portfolio here. I don't know if it should have gone out to the group and the committee beforehand. Does it make sense to share the screen?
Sure.
Okay, I'll plan to do that. And one of the questions I know that came up earlier was talking about the economy and just the downturn that COVID-19 has had on the impact on the economy just in general. We'll touch on a little bit of that in our presentation here as well. So I don't know if we'll answer the question so specifically as what was brought up by a little bit earlier, but we'll hopefully at least provide some context to that as well. So see if I can pull it up. Hold on a second. Everyone see the screen?
Yeah, we can now.
Yes.
And with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Danny to kick us off, and he'll give you, as I mentioned, some brief points on the economy in general, and then we'll dive into what's been going on with the county's portfolio specifically. So, Danny?
Sure. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. So what we have here on the first page, just, the markets are facing a lot of uncertainties currently. The impact of the coronavirus has continued its ripple effect through the U.S. economy and the global economies in the last 7 months and most likely going forward. Obviously, there's been a global health crisis. Coronavirus restrictions were gradually eased throughout the U.S., but now have been followed by some regional hotspots, just reminding people of how long the virus may linger. And then obviously earlier on, we did have an economic shutdown. Second quarter GDP plunged by about 31%. Just for context, GDP fell by only about 8.4% during the height of the 2008 Great Financial Crisis. So, but going forward, as I said before, there's still a lot of uncertainties that we're going to face in terms of future growth, what's going to happen in the markets. The Fed has definitely stepped in and play a large role in supporting the financial markets and providing stability. It remains to be seen how much they'll do that going forward. And then obviously we do have a presidential election within the next couple of weeks, which may also impact the markets going forward as well. On the next page, and I know this is something that's been on everybody's mind recently, it's just the labor market. For the third quarter of calendar year 2020, the labor market did show some further improvement, but there's still some troubling signs of a stalling recovery. We did see some robust jobs growth in July and August, but the economy did add less than forecasted amount of jobs in September. The good news is that the jobless rate fell from a pandemic high of 14.7% to what it is currently now at 7.9%. But one of the reasons that the unemployment rate fell is the fact that the labor force participation rate fell, and that actually accounted for some of the drop in the unemployment rate. And then if you look at the chart on the right of this page, you can see that there's still about 25 million people who are collecting unemployment compensation, whether it's unemployment insurance benefits. And, you compare that to where we were just 1 year ago, we're only about 1.4 million were receiving benefits. So we still have a long way to go with regards to the recovery. But we are still making some progress, and you can see that on the next page. Personal spending has increased over the last few months, unfortunately at a decelerating pace, but still, we're still seeing consumers spend money. Unfortunately, personal income has fallen. You did see that one blip on your top right there back in April, but that was mainly due to the government with their stimulus checks and Americans receiving $1,200 checks. And it remains to be seen if there is going to be another stimulus package going forward. So, GDP, consumer spending does make up about 2/3 of GDP. And right now it's questionable if consumers have enough strength to set the economy back on track without any fiscal support. Nevertheless, though, Business and manufacturing activity is still strong, and the housing market still remains a bright spot in the economy so far this year, as low mortgage rates and strong demand and limited inventory have fueled robust sales and appreciating home prices. So it is a little bit different than what we saw 12 years ago with regards to recession at that time, where the housing market played a bigger impact. Then here, we are seeing somewhat of a bright spot in the housing market, mainly because of low rates. And if you look at the next page here, one of the reasons for those low rates is because of the Federal Reserve. You can, it seems like it was years ago, but it was only about 7 months ago that the Fed met and had 2 emergency rate cuts to cut rates basically to zero. They did meet last month. They've acknowledged that there's still, tremendous human and economic hardship because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And, they have updated their economic projections. And, as you can see here, GDP is supposed to be a little bit stronger going forward, but not as robust as we saw before. The unemployment rate is expected to drop. But like I said, there is some underlying factors with regards to that unemployment rate in terms of people are working, but they may not necessarily be working the same amount of hours or making the same amount of money as they did previously. So that's something that the Fed is looking at. And because of that, they have dropped rates significantly low, and they are expected to keep rates low through 2023. One of the things they also referenced at their last meeting is the fact that they are also looking at inflation, and they kind of changed their inflation policy. You can see that on the next page. They did suggest that they're going to allow inflation to moderately rise above 2% for some time, so that inflation averages 2% over time, except back then, prior to this, they just wanted inflation to reach that 2% level before they thought about raising rates. Now they want it to average over 2% for a while. So that basically means that, they most likely will continue to keep rates low for a longer period of time until we see inflation pick up in the near term. So what does that mean for rates? Unfortunately, interest rates are very low, and you can see that on the next page. The Treasury yield curve basically remained relatively unchanged over the past quarter, with all maturities from the 3-month to the 30-year area basically ending the third quarter of 2020 within 5 basis points of where they began. Yields on shorter term tenors drifted lower, partly because of the lack of new fiscal stimulus, and which means that the Treasury is not issuing as much debt as maybe anticipated. And longer dated yields only inched up slightly higher, nudged only primarily by the Fed's new inflation targeting policy. And as a result, Brian will get into returns, but Treasury returns were kind of muted for the third quarter. And even though the yield curve did steepen, yields did trade at a very, very narrow range, and will probably most likely trade at a narrow range for the foreseeable future going forward. On the next page, and this is something that Brian will allude to, but we did want to at least let you know about credit securities and what's going on in the credit realm. As you can see here, spreads narrowed significantly from where they were back in February and March when we had this market uncertainty when the pandemic first hit. There was a lot less liquidity in the markets, and because of that uncertainty, we saw spreads, particularly in corporate notes and asset-backed securities, which are in your portfolio. Those spreads widened significantly over time. However, as the Fed has stepped in to provide some liquidity and calm to the markets, we have seen a downward trend in spreads, and that actually has benefited your portfolio. And you'll see that when Brian does talk about your portfolio going forward. But nevertheless, those credit securities that were in your portfolio did appreciate a lot in value, much more so than treasuries. If you remember back in the first quarter of 2020, treasuries were the place to be and we did underperform. But since then, anything that's other than treasuries has been the place to be, and that has benefited your portfolio. One thing we did want to touch on the next page, even though in your general fund, we we do, like I said, have different types of securities, whether it's treasuries, supranational securities, corporates, asset-backed securities, and municipal securities. And you can see how here, like I said before, just for the quarter and also year to date, how those non-credit securities, particularly lower rated corporate securities, have returned much better than government securities such as treasuries and agencies. One other thing we did want to touch on the next page, I know this is something that's been on everybody's mind as well in terms of the equity markets. Yes, I know you cannot necessarily invest in the S&P 500 or in stocks, but we just wanted to briefly mention that the equity markets did pull back a little bit, mainly because of stalled stimulus progress in September. But the S&P 500, as you can see here, did reach an all-time new high back in August and has significantly increased from the lows that we saw back in March and April. But if you look at the chart on the right, the main driver of the equity markets has been the information technology sector. So if you look at some of your big tech companies, the FANG stocks, as some people like to call it, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. You could throw Microsoft in there. They have been the main driver of why the stock market has been increasing so significantly. And so people think that there's a disconnect between Main Street and Wall Street. I would say it's really more of the haves and the have-nots, and there are very few companies that are thriving right now. And it's still about 2/3 or so of the companies in the S&P 500 are basically have a negligible return or a 0% return or a negative return. So it's only a handful of companies that are driving the equity markets. So we just wanted to mention that, so that you have that in mind going forward. And the last thing I do want to mention before I turn it over to Brian, on the next page, we do have our heat map in terms of what our sector outlook is. As I mentioned before, your portfolio is comprised of treasuries, corporates, asset backs, and munis. We are slightly positive on short-term treasury bills and neutral on treasury notes. We are slightly negative and negative on supranationals and corporates, mainly, and on asset-backed securities, mainly because there really is no spread to be had, and there's a little bit more liquidity in the treasury market. So even though those credit securities in your portfolio have benefited over the last 6 months or so, we are not expecting that those credit securities to have the same positive impact going forward. That doesn't mean we're going to get out of these sectors. We'll still continue to keep corporates and asset-backed securities and supranationals in your portfolio for diversification purposes, but we may not necessarily add to those allocations. And we are neutral on municipal securities as well. We were slightly positive, but neutral now just because of the lack of fiscal stimulus. So I will stop here and see if there are any questions, and if not, I will turn it over to Brian.
Any of the supervisors or anyone wish to chime in with a question? Okay, hearing none.
Thanks, Danny. I'll jump ahead to the county's specific portfolio, and Danny alluded to a lot of what I'll talk about here just briefly, but I wanted to touch on a few just different points here for the benefit of the committee. As Danny alluded to, there is asset-backed securities, U.S. treasuries, supranationals, municipal bonds, and corporate notes in the county's portfolio, as you can see in that chart in the upper right-hand corner in the sector allocation. Just to the left of that chart, you'll see the credit sector or the credit quality breakdown of the portfolio. One announcement I always like to make when pointing out this chart is it only pulls in one rating agency for this chart when we're running the analytics for this chart. So you'll see a sector there of non-rated securities. Those are not not rated securities. They typically just don't have an S&P rating. A lot of them will actually have a AAA rating, which is the highest credit quality rating by Moody's or another investment rating agency. So just a heads up there. On the far left is a portfolio breakdown. You can look at the par value, just over $6 million. In total market value is 6.5, a little over $6.5 million. The yield at market is 0.61%. That's something that's going to be important as we talk about just future earnings as we go. That number, even a couple of quarters ago, as Danny alluded to at the beginning of this year, before the Federal Reserve made their two emergency rate cuts back in March, was significantly higher in terms of generating income in the portfolio. Danny alluded to the natural appreciation of securities in the portfolio with the rates coming down. That's a great thing, but the double-edged sword of that whole thing is when you're looking to reinvest when securities mature, you're investing in a significantly lower rate environment. So that's kind of a double-edged sword as we talk about there. Again, it's great for the performance of the portfolio as we talk about, and we'll look at on the next slide. But again, the portfolio, as securities mature and we look to reinvest, the investment landscape has changed significantly, as Danny touched on, and rates have fallen fairly precipitously since March. So with that said, we'll flip over to the next page, which is showing the performance for the quarter, and actually has the 1 year and 3 year marks in there as well, also since inception back in 2015. But if you look at that 1 year mark, 4.67% total return over the year, as Danny alluded to, just in terms of the natural appreciation of a portfolio when rates are falling, it's very indicative in that number right there. You look at the past quarter, rates, like I said, fell very, very sharply at the end of March and into the second quarter in April and May. And you can just see the value there. Absolute performance is great, outperforming by 0.16% or 16 basis points versus the benchmark indice. But again, you're looking at 0.29% versus where the index had fall, or what it generated throughout the first part of the year, with the natural appreciation of 4.67% over to this point of last year. So just wanted to show that there. We always take a long-term view on these portfolios and like to have, like I said, a long-term perspective. As Danny alluded to, treasuries were the top performer in the first quarter of this year. Now, we didn't meet after the first quarter, but what you would have seen is any portfolio that had any credit perspective whatsoever generally is going to perform best in any sort of market condition. But given the absolute flight to quality at the end of the first quarter, when investors were kind of really scared of what the economic fallout from COVID-19 was going to be, the treasury bond is the safest, most security out there, and that's what the investors were flocking to. So if you had a portfolio of 100% treasuries, it looked great at the end of the first quarter. The market has kind of gotten back to more normalcy, if you will. Spreads are certainly tight, so there's not a lot of yield out there anywhere, but that spread tightening has led to the value appreciation in other sectors beyond treasuries as we move throughout 2020 here. So again, absolute basis, strong total return for the 1 year mark. Flip side of that is, as we move forward here, investing in this low interest rate landscape, it's going to be hard to continue to generate the income that we've been able to do so over the last year or two, just given where absolute rates are, as Danny alluded to. The Federal Reserve, is, as Danny mentioned as well, is on record saying they're likely not going to be raising the short-term interest rate anytime soon. So we're going to be very range bound on the interest rate period in terms of the securities we can invest in for the next, I would say, at least year, maybe longer than that. The Fed's saying out to 2023. We'll see if that continues to hold, if inflation does pick up, as Danny mentioned, but they are also on record saying that they're not going to have that 2% target in terms of looking to raise rates. So they could let inflation run a little bit more before they actually raise rates this time around. We'll see if that actually happens. But by and large, I guess kind of putting a wrap up on it, again, strong performance on a relative basis, strong year from a performance perspective on an absolute basis and also relative basis. And we'll kind of remains to be seen where the rest of the year takes us, what happens after the election, what happens with the upcoming year, and just the COVID-19 response from an economic standpoint. With that, I wanted to touch base very briefly on this one as well. This is going to be the market value and accrual basis. As you can see, in the change in value is going to show what happened on a market value basis there as well, with net purchases and sales. The hard-earned interest is that last line from the bottom is $35,000. That's going to be the same on a market value or accrual basis. And again, that number is going to be more range bound than it was from an interest perspective, just given the fact that yields and rates are significantly lower. great for going out and refinancing a mortgage or getting a loan on something from a personal perspective, but very hard for generating significant income in the fixed income markets, which we've alluded to in our presentation. So the remainder, and again, this should be in your packet as well that was sent out, is going to be further charts on some of the things that we have. It also shows a security by security breakdown, as I alluded to, about some of the interest rates going to the back of, or excuse me, not interest rates, but the credit ratings. If you go to the back page here, you can see those broken up by both Moody's and S&P. Some of these securities may also have a Fitch or Kroll rating or a different rating agency, but again, we'll show at least the full breakdown of ratings there as well, in the event that the S&P rating that pulled into the chart earlier was non-rated, just if you had interest in some of that stuff. But that's all we had for prepared remarks. Know that you guys have a agenda to get to as well, but if there are any further questions, Danny and I'd be happy to help answer. And I always say at the end of these meetings as well, if anything pops up after the fact, we're both available to jump on a call or answer those questions as they pop up as well. And Doris and Keith and Paul should have our contact information to provide to you if you'd like to have a separate discussion.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Sheila.
Well, it's a great presentation, and it looks like you've done very well for the county. But as you said, we've got some things coming up in the next few months that are going to be very impactful on which way this goes. How do you work with the county in modifying this, especially given what may occur in November?
No, and that's a great question, and I'll let Danny can provide some context to or jump in if he has any extra thoughts on this as well. But one of the things that we like to do is we like to consider ourselves an active manager, and so we're compensated based on our assets under management. There's no, if we do 100 trades or one trade, there's no extra fee or commission that we earn on any of that. We simply get paid on a pure assets under management perspective. So we take a very proactive approach when we're looking at portfolios. We like to rebalance where and when we can, look to take advantage of sectors where and when we can. Danny mentioned this earlier with asset-backed securities and supranationals. We're a little bit more tentative in that area now just because the credit spread isn't really there. But we took it earlier this year. We actually made some tactical moves in looking, if you remember back to a chart earlier in the presentation where the rates actually spiked up quite a bit near the end of March when everyone was buying treasuries, and there was actually some value to be had there. So that was one of the things that we took advantage of on behalf of the county. Now I will say the way that we manage a county portfolio is it's in a non-discretionary facet. So every trade that we end up doing, we generate the trade idea and we look to see where we can find value in the fixed income marketplace within the county's investment policy and state statutes as well. And that will get sent over to Doris and Keith and Paul, and they'll approve that trade. And then we can go and from that standpoint, make the transaction. But it's a good question. And I wish I had better answers for that question. The absolute rates are so low across the board that as of right now, there isn't a ton of value to be had out there. Now, I think that could change in the coming months, particularly after the election, but that remains to be seen. And the way we position the portfolio is so we can take advantage of that when opportunities arise, such as what happened at the end of March and beginning of April.
What I'm wondering, I used to work for a financial firm a long, long time ago, and I know that in financial firms that they have their group of individuals that are their researchers, they're lobbyists, they're people that are out there trying to anticipate what's going to happen, and then they feed that information to all of you to make decisions on what you might want to do with the portfolio. So have they given you any forecasts at this point in time?
In terms of post-election or just generally speaking, or?
Post-election.
Yeah. So we have a credit committee, we have an investment committee. So everybody's kind of, to your point, Sheila, they are the ones that kind of drive the overarching investment decisions that we make as a firm. And then that's filtered down to each specific client portfolio. A lot of our investment committee standpoint is that a lot of the election is already kind of baked into a certain degree. And I think a lot of that has to do with what the Federal Reserve is on record saying, particularly in the fixed income marketplace, and the fact that they aren't going to raise rates anytime soon. They want the economy to really heal. I mean, it sounds like, and they made a comment specific to inflation, they're not even going to raise rates if inflation runs above its usual bogey of 2%. So a lot of that, no matter who's elected, they think that the Federal Reserve is really driving the policy right now, quite honestly. And supposed to act independently of the administration. There have been times over the last couple of years that that's been up in the air and whether that's actually the case or not. But the Federal Reserve does drive a lot of that policy, and what they've been saying and what they've had in their most recent committee meeting minutes is showing that at least for the near term, rates are going to remain fairly range bound. And we anticipate that being the case for at least the next 6 months to probably 12 months. And like, I don't know if it's going to hold out for the full 3 years as the Fed is on record saying, but again, it's going to be holding out for the foreseeable future. I would say at least the 6 to 12 month range.
So
And Danny, I
one
don't
could
know if you have any further thoughts on that, but that's my take, at least from what we've heard.
Okay.
Personally.
Well, one could probably assume then that once the election is over, that you guys are going to be pretty busy.
Well, potentially, yeah. So, like I said, we've kind of seen a lot of it, and we think the market's priced a lot of that in, and the Fed has kind of taken its stance on where they think it's going to be. But yes, we like to take advantage of opportunities within the constructs that we can within the portfolio, within the portfolio.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
So Chairman, if I may ask a question,
Certainly, go ahead.
just real quick, Brian, your PFM is rating the outlook for corporate as negative. I note in our sector allocation is 25% of our portfolio. Are we likely to look at any adjustment to that, or is that an appropriate amount given?
Well, and so that's a great question, Paul. And I want to expound on that a little bit further. So that's our, if you're looking at that heat map, that's our future outlook for the sector.
Right.
So a lot of the securities that the county already owns were purchased prior to. And so the reason the outlook was negative for the future of the sector, if you will, is because those credit spreads. So it basically be the yield that corporate note is achieving over the same maturity treasury bond or a risk-free type investment. Is negative is because that spread is so low. So you're basically not really getting compensated to invest in a corporate security like you normally would when markets are performing under normal circumstances. So a lot of that, like I said, is future looking. So I think a safe assumption would be to say that we won't be increasing that allocation, but given that a lot of those securities were already held within the portfolio at good yields and probably good spreads to where treasuries were at that point in time, we probably will keep that to where we can and let those mature. And then once those do mature, we'll look to see what particular fixed income sector is the best spot in terms of our analysis to find for a home for the funds that are maturing.
I appreciate that. It's also should go without saying that our investment strategy is generally conservative, needs to remain conservative, and it needs to be long-term. Take the long view. We're not chasing short-term gains. So
no,
appreciate
absolutely.
that.
And that's us too. And we focus on the constructs of safety, liquidity, and then yield in that order when we're investing on behalf of the county. So that's coinciding with your investment policy. And that's how we look at it as well, to perform well amongst different market cycles and keep the risk profile low.
Okay. Thank you, Brian and Danny. Are there any other questions for Brian or for Danny on this?
I have a question, Tim Lenow.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, I'm seeing in the vouchers that we pay your firm $1,250 a month every month. That comes out to $15,000 a year on management of approximately 6.5 million. That seems a bit steep.
It is. And if you look back on not steep, but when you look back on the contractual arrangement, there was a larger amount of funds that were in there at that point or a while ago. Our minimum annual fee is actually $15,000 a year. And so it's charging the county, I guess, what our minimum annual fee is. Over the last number of years, some funds have been pulled from the portfolio for various different reasons. So that has come down a certain degree in what we've been managing. But to that point, we could be managing more and the fee would still remain the same, if that makes any sense. So that's always an option that's on the table. We've put that out there, but that is how we've done it. And like I said, that is our firm-wide contractual minimum fee. And that was what was in the contract when we signed back in 2015.
All right. Is there any adjustment potentially with these low interest rate environment?
I'll never say never, but our minimum annual fee has actually increased since then for new accounts that were brought on. So the county's actually grandfathered in a lower fee than would be otherwise. But I would think the chances would be low, but again, I will never say never. I'm not on our firm's pricing committee, nor is Danny, but we could always bring it to the pricing committee for a certain adjust to check on that as well. I would say the chances are very, very slim, considering that our minimum firm-wide fee is actually increased over the last couple of years, and the county's grandfathered in at a lower rate. But
well, we would always appreciate any consideration that would be given in the future.
Absolutely, absolutely. And like I said, I'll never say never, because I've been surprised before, but you never say never. And that is another point, though. If there are any extra funds or anything that is out there, we've always maintained that as well, that they could be put into this portfolio, and essentially they wouldn't be charged any extra fee for doing that, because it's the annual fee is what it is, and you can basically invest a little bit more money without having a fee attached to those funds, if that makes any sense.
Finding extra money in this county, I think, would be a very good trick.
And as investment advisors, our goal is to try to produce as much investment income and extra money as we can without, like I said, taking on risk or sacrificing safety or liquidity of the portfolio. So that's our goal, and we continue to operate in that capacity.
Well, as I've looked over the portfolio, it is a very well-run and very conservative portfolio. It looks like it's got a great mix, but at the same time, pardon me for whining.
Don't apologize. It's a good question, and I appreciate you bringing that up.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else with any questions? Okay, hearing none. Brian and Danny, thank you for a very good report. And I think that we're probably have a pretty smooth operating relationship going at this point, and hopefully that will continue in the future. Thanks again for your time.
Likewise, thank you to the committee for having us as always. Appreciate it.
Okay, moving on with our agenda. 5 is consideration for action taken by this committee. Our first point is contingency fund request. This request is coming in from our ENS department. Anyone, Paul, would you like to address that?
Sure. So this is a contingency fund request for purchase of software, basically to allow remote access for permits, information, so that people don't have to come in. We had originally talked about doing this through COVID-19 funds, since it is somewhat related, but the need is somewhat immediate based on staffing right now in the ENS, the zoning division of the ENS. The contents of the files, this program would allow us to scan them, and then we could email when people wanted, to plumbers or to building inspectors, or just the property owner, if they wanted to see the records on the land use documents. So the amount requested is $38,000. Like I say, it addresses not only a need that helps us maintain remote access, provides easier access for these records, but also will make it considerably easier on existing staff. And the county manager and staff recommend approval of this contingency fund request.
Mr. Chair, I would move approval of this contingency request.
Thank you, Sheila. Is there a second to that?
Second, Tim Lenow.
Tim, thank you very much for your second. Any discussion or questions?
Chairman Bartlett.
David, please go ahead.
Just wondering, the low bid was 34,000. 38,000 is requested. Is that just because we think it might go up? Just asking.
Yeah, it allows a little fudge factor. Obviously, we're not going to spend money more money than we're actually needing.
Any other questions? Jim Tripp?
How does this contingency fund request meet the criteria of what the 2 criteria, emergency or opportunity?
This one, in my opinion, qualifies in terms of emergency. The need is real, and the need is right now. We could delay it and put it into the 21 budget. Not only does that need to be accounted, you're very familiar, obviously, Supervisor Tripp, with our difficulties in reaching a balanced budget, but that would leave us in the situation that we're in. So there is a certain urgency. The there's 2 positions at least that have been eliminated in the past 2 years, or not eliminated, but unfilled in the past 2 years, a plumbing inspector and a zoning technician position that are unfilled. So it does put considerable strain on remaining staff. So in my opinion, at least, this qualifies under that criterion.
And I recognize all that, but we've had this discussion how many times in the past. This strikes me as one of those items that should have been in the budget. The staffing issues I understand and appreciate, but they didn't occur overnight. I mean, this obviously something that, well, it seems obvious to me that I mean, nothing drastic has changed, and I have no objection to spending the money whatsoever, except for the fact that a few years ago, we established a couple of criteria for using the contingency fund, and this does not seem to meet them.
And Mr. Chairman, perhaps you'd want to entertain Bob Colson for further insight on the justification on this.
Sure. Bob, we still have you here?
I am still here. Thank you.
Yeah, if you could go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, I guess I agree with Mr. Miller that it is an emergency, and yes, we did ask to put this in the budget, and it was decided that maybe we should see if we couldn't get some of the COVID money, and that was not practical, and then it was decided to maybe go for contingency. And the reason that I say that it's an emergency, Mr. Tripp, is that the last position that was not funded was the planner position, and that person, before that position was not funded, that person was taking on a lot of the zoning inspection duties, doing kind of double duty. And when that position was eliminated, last year's budget was already in place. We didn't have the information or the data under our belt to say that that we're going to have a real problem this year with staffing. We thought that it would be an emergency, that we would be understaffed and we wouldn't be able to get at the work. But until we finally got into this year, and combined with COVID, it really put a big strain on staff. And so I didn't come to my committee until I had some data that says, we really do need help. I didn't think that I could come back to the committee the very next, 3 months after they didn't fund the position and say, we're going to need this position because we have a lot of work, when there wasn't enough data to substantiate that. So I agree with Mr. Miller that it is an emergency, given what we found out and when we found out about it, and we're not going to be getting a position for next year. So while this isn't going to free up enough time that we're going to say we're going to get caught up without a position, the amount of work that this is going to save both staff and the community in terms of just being able to access files, I think is tremendous. And so I agree that it is an emergency.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. Any further questions about that, Jim?
Nope.
Thank you, Jim. Anyone else? Okay. We do have a motion has been made and seconded to move forward with the contingency fund request of not to exceed $38,000. Is that correct?
Correct.
And we do have a bid existing for $33,889 to complete the work. Any further discussion? Hearing none, are we ready to vote? All those in favor of releasing the funds from the contingency fund to the NS department, not to exceed $38,000, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes. And we will move forward with that request. We have a second request to our contingency fund. This one coming from our county clerk and has to do with something that we as a board requested, and that is to fund a referendum question on the ballot. Are there any one like to make a motion on this request?
I'll move. Supervisor Tripp.
Thank you, Jim. A second to that?
I'll second it.
Second by
Supervisor
Chairman Bartlett. Any questions that you have? We could be directed to Julie, or if not, she had a good narrative here as to how she's going to spend the money.
Tim Lenow, I got a question here in regards to this. This is essentially for printing and getting these referendums on the ballot at this time, or is this a one for the spring?
Nope, this is for the current ballot that's out there. Currently, the cost of the invoices, I had based this on an estimate, and I have received the invoices since then. There are right around $48,000 in invoices for the ballot programming and the ballots themselves. I did an analysis, and originally my estimate was would have been about $16,100 for the two. There are 3 different types of publications yet to do on this that I don't have invoices for. Based on where I was sitting, I did submit $24,665 and some odd change in routes to recovery expenses. So after now analyzing my budget, I think I can absorb everything else, but just almost up to about 8,000. And it might come in a hair lower based on what the publication costs are.
Just out of curiosity, Julie, didn't we already deal with this on a county board level?
You authorized the resolution for the referenda, but there was no expenditures taxed to it, and it was estimated in the resolution on each one that an estimated cost would be $8,500 per referenda question.
Okay. So we said yes to the referendum, just didn't pay for it.
Correct.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Any other comments or questions for Julie or anyone else? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor of the advancing the money to the county clerk or paying for our referenda, and again coming out of the fund, all say aye, please.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, that also passes. All right, moving forward on our agenda, review of the vouchers. Were there any voucher questions that need to be addressed today?
Mr. Chair, John Calabrese.
John, please go ahead.
Yeah, I see on under the patrol section 1270, $6,126 for police radio, and it's billed to Eau Claire Fence Corporation. And I looked them up, and they're in Chippewa Falls, and I'm just wondering why they're buying police radios or why we're billing them for them.
Catch that one.
Would you repeat the amount, please, John?
$6,126. It's on, I don't know the page number, but yeah, towards the end of the patrol section.
Police radio. I do not know the answer, Supervisor Calabrese. I will find out for you.
Okay. And then there's a similar charge right beneath that, still under patrol. And I was curious about police body armor versus also 6,100 and something. And I'm just wondering if that's just an upgrade on armor that happens regularly, or if there are more patrol people who need it, or how that works.
Okay. We'll look that one up for you as well.
Thank you.
Anything else, John?
No, that's it for me.
Thank you, John. Paul, go ahead.
No, that's all.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Supervisor Story, please go ahead.
Just something I've wondered every time I see this, and I mean to bring it up, but is there truly still a Northern States Power, or should it be saying XL Energy?
Mr. Chair, if I can help?
Please go ahead, Jim.
Yes, there is such a thing as Northern States Power. They are the owners and parent company of XL Energy, but that's an interesting question because I was surprised by the same thing here a couple of years ago and had to ask about it and was surprised to realize, yep, Northern States Power Company is still there.
They're on the checks then, huh?
I guess.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. Anyone else with any questions about the voucher report?
Mr. Chair.
Please go ahead, Mr. Tripp.
This is on the very first section of the very first page. And it's under the county clerk. Well, I thought it was on the first page, second page, I'm sorry. Under the county clerk, right below that, there's a section called legislative support. And there's a couple of charges for publications for Carlton DeWitt, who runs some of the local papers. Can somebody explain what kind of legislative support we're talking about here?
That's all the publication of your minutes and any legal notices for the county board.
Okay, and legislative support, why is it tabbed as that?
It has everything that I spend for the county board publications is all under that category. It also is the proceedings book comes out of there. It has its own entire cost center for those two specific purposes.
Okay, just seemed a little bit odd to me. Thank you, Julie.
You're welcome.
And then I have another question, and it's from the Judicial Center, which is way down the list here. They have a water bill that totals about $8,000. And it struck me that that's a lot of water. I compared it to the water bill for CSB, for example, which is about $1,000. So I'm guessing that a good share of that $8,000 water bill for the Judicial Center is actually for jail use. That's a guess. And if that's the case, should that be charged to the jail somehow, or somebody enlighten me here a little bit?
That is also something that I will have to track down for you. And I will get you that answer.
Would there be any advantage to specifying what part of the Judicial Center those charges are assigned to?
It would be, I mean, every bit of information that we can help clarify these things is a good thing. Whether or not the programs will allow us to make that differentiation, I don't know, but we can certainly look into it.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. That's all for me.
Thank you, Jim. Anyone else? If hearing none, anyone wish to make a motion on the acceptance of the voucher report?
This is Supervisor Tripp. I move that we accept the vouchers in the amount of $1,115,049.90.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tripp. Second, is that you, John?
Tim Leno.
Or Tim had the second. I'm sorry. Thank you, Tim. Supervisor Leno is the second. Any other discussion? And thank you all for your questions. And I'm sure Mr. Miller will track it all down for us.
You take the vote?
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Aye. And any opposed? That passes. All right. Thank you. Next on our agenda today is the amendment to a temporary emergency leave policy. And that is coming from our Director of Human Resources. And if Heather Murray, you'd like to take over with that.
I found the unmute button really fast. So we had back in April established an emergency paid sick leave policy for our emergency responders and our healthcare providers, recognizing that the FFCRA that came down from the federal government excluded them. But we as a county wanted to make sure that if something were to happen COVID related, that they were taken care of up to the 80 hours that the rest of the employee group had received. As we know, as we go through this, the science changes over time. And so what we've started to experience is it is starting to visit our emergency responders and our healthcare providers, and they're having to be quarantined. Originally, when we wrote this, we indicated they had to test positive for COVID-19 in order to be eligible for the 80 hours of up to 80 hours of compensation for missed work. We're finding that even if they're quarantined, it's possible for somebody who tests negative but is in quarantine to actually have to be out of work for 24 plus days. And that's just with the current science and how they're running those numbers. So as we've started to see people sort of start experiencing this, we realized that was sort of a miss on our part, and that if they were exposed and have to quarantine, that we feel as though they should be eligible for up to that 80 hours. So what I'm bringing to you is just that policy modification. Again, the primary employee base under the FFCRA is eligible if they are expected to quarantine, isolate, or they test positive. And so this just kind of equates our emergency responders, our sheriff's deputies and sergeants, et cetera, our healthcare providers, nursing home, and health department, if they end up having to quarantine and they're unable to work. So I should add that caveat. So if we have work for them to do from home and we're able to get them a laptop and get them all of the technology, we are asking, and they're well enough to work, we are asking that they work, and we're assigning that work out. But if there's truly no work available and they're unable to work because of the pandemic here through the end of the year, this does expire at the end of the year. At that time, I may be back with some other request. We haven't really talked about that, but this just expands that.
Okay. Any questions for Heather about this?
Heather, you did make a mention that a person can be out for 24 days.
Yep, it is possible for an individual, if they test negative, if you are a close contact and you have to maintain contact with the individual that's supposed to be isolated, your 14 days doesn't start until your last day of contact. So if you live with somebody who has COVID and you continue to maintain contact, you don't completely isolate them. When they're released, that's when your 14 days starts. So they're out and they're able to go to the grocery store and they're released, but your 14 days of quarantine does not start until that last day of contact.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Here, thank you. Any other questions?
One point of clarification, this would cover non-union employees. So if this is approved, I will need to talk to the union and enter into a letter of agreement so that they would also be eligible. I don't think they're going to object.
Okay. All right. Hearing none, would someone like to make a motion that we go forward with this temporary change to our leave policy?
I'll move. Supervisor Tripp.
Okay, Jim, Supervisor Tripp moves. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Sheila, Supervisor Story seconds. Any other questions? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Passes. Okay, thank you, Heather, for all the information and for moving us forward on that. Considerations for reports, resolutions, and ordinances to the county board that we would be passing on from this committee. The first one is 6A, a resolution canceling checks that are over 2 years of age. And we do this every year at this time. We get a report, the copy of that report was sent out to you from a number of people who just have not cashed the checks that they were issued. However, they could still come in and bring in their canceled check and get a new check issued to them if they would so wish to do so. Otherwise, it's a way of getting these old checks canceled out of our system. Would someone like to make a motion on that?
I so moved, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Sheila. Second?
Second, Tim Leno.
Tim, thank you for seconding that. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. We'll move that forward. Our next resolution is the charging back of illegal tax certificates. These are certificates generated that we find out are duplication or part of the property is under another certificate. If you can see, it's not a very large amount this year. I think it was like $45 or something, if I am correct. And again, this is a kind of a housekeeping accounting feature that we need to take care of on an annual basis. Anyone care to make a motion on this resolution?
So moved, Tim Leno.
Tim Leno, thank you, Supervisor Leno. Second?
A second.
Seconded by Supervisor Calabrese. Any questions? Seeing no questions, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Passes. We'll move that forward. A resolution regarding the 4-year 2021 pay grid and other compensation. And those, that new grid and so forth were sent out again electronically to you. Heather or Paul, who would like to address this one?
I'm trying to get my camera to turn on. There it goes.
Okay.
I don't blame the camera for not wanting to display my face. Be that as it may, this is also an annual resolution, and it reflects the changes that came out of the budget process that we've been going through for the fiscal year 21. So this is kind of the official recommendation from the Committee on Administration on changes to the pay grid and the benefits for the fiscal year coming. We've discussed those at length in previous meetings. The brief summary is a 2% adjustment to the pay grid, but a freezing on the steps, and then adjustments to employee contributions by 2% increase of 2% on the total premium costs borne by the employees, plus changes to the maximum amount of pockets and deductibles. Did I leave anything out, Heather?
I too was trying to find the video. No, that's right. Good job.
Okay. Anyone care to make a motion on this? I would make that motion that we would, this is part of our budget process and these are adjustments that reflect the work done by the executive committee and this committee to create a balanced budget for the year 2021.
I'll
Second to
second that.
Okay, we have a second to that by Chairman Bartlett, I believe. Okay. Any questions or comments?
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Go ahead, Supervisor Tripp.
There's a whole bunch of numbers on here, and I'm assuming that they're all correct. Assuming that we pass this, what would happen if we discovered that there was a misplaced decimal, or how would we go about correcting that, or what would be the ramifications?
Depending on the nature of the error, in many cases, a misplaced decimal is simply considered a Scrivener's error. We have backing documentation to demonstrate that it was a misprint as opposed to a mistake. If it's more egregious, then it's possible that we may have to address it through a budget adjustment.
No, I'm assuming that it would just be a
Scrivener's error. Yeah.
Just so anyway, it never occurred to me before, but looking at all the numbers, and I haven't looked at each and every one, I'm thinking I'm going to vote in favor of this. We're going to pass this through. And what would happen if one of the numbers were, numbers transposed, or it's easy to make those kinds of things.
Well, staff has never made an error in the past, so we're not quite sure what we would do.
Well, that's really good to know.
Very sarcastic.
Wow.
Where did you learn? Never mind.
That's why we gave you a raise.
Okay, that's a good point, Mr. Supervisor Tripp. And hopefully, like you say, it's something we would not get into a whole lot of trouble over.
Well, I'm assuming, as Paul mentioned, that we have the documentation and the background material to demonstrate what, if there were to be a minor math error or something. Okay, that helps me to rationalize it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none. All those in favor of these pages, basically showing the adjustments and again, the adjustments to the grid and the new insurance premiums and plan, I guess, as we could call it, including dental and all the health insurance options. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Thank you all for that. Going forward from here, next meeting date and decision on whether or when we have a November and December committee meeting or meetings. Mr. Miller, if you have some suggestions for us.
Our normal meeting date in November would fall on Thanksgiving. I assume we don't want to do that. What we have done in the past is pick the following Thursday, which would be December the 3rd, or perhaps the week after. Both of those, neither of those has regularly scheduled standing committees, the 3rd or the 10th. Have regular standing committee meetings that would conflict if we wanted to select one or the other date for a combined November and December meeting date for the Committee on Administration. So it's your preference, December 3rd or December 10.
Anyone have a preference or a comment as to one or the other?
3rd sounds good.
Okay, Mr. Lino, Lino says the 3rd. Thank you, Tim. Anyone else? Anyone who the 3rd would be a problem for, at least in your knowledge at this point? All right, then let's go ahead and as per the suggestion by Supervisor Lino, we'll use Thursday, December 3rd at 3:30 p.m. our normal meeting time.
Yeah. And just as a reminder, as you hopefully are all familiar, we do open the Zoom meeting a half an hour before in case there's technical difficulties experienced by anyone attending. We can troubleshoot them before the meeting gets underway. So officially the meeting would be 3:30, but the Zoom meeting invite will say 3 o'clock.
All right. Any other questions or announcements to be made by anyone? If not, with that meeting date set, Committee on Administration meeting for Thursday, October 22nd is adjourned. Thank you all for your help and your participation.
Heather, could you get back to me via email?